Struggling to discuss sex and intimacy with your partner?
Not feeling met, seen, or heard in your relationships?
I'm Janelle.
And I'm Andrea. We're two midlife mavericks sharing our own experiences.
Messy AF and no regrets.
With marriage, divorce, polyamory, and pleasure.
We've learned that when you're brave enough to figure out what you want and ask for it,
with partners, friends, family, and most importantly, yourself,
you'll feel more alive and free.
Question everything, especially your mother's advice.
There's no rom-com formula for this, but don't panic.
Being alone matters. Honey, I can't miss you if you don't leave.
What if your breakup could be your breakthrough?
Our podcast is for brave hearts.
Anyone who seeks or has found the courage to confront their fears and limiting beliefs about breaking societal norms in the spirit of finding their truth.
If you're seeking permission to be brave in your relationships
and want to feel less alone along the way, we got you.
Talking to Megan Phippen was better than any podcast I've ever listened to. More informative, more sacred, more authentic, more in service to couples talking about sex and intimacy than anything I've read or listened to.
Yeah, I am mind blown. The wisdom that she shared, the tangible skills that she shared. It also just felt so affirming to my and your life experience that we have stumbled and fumbled and been messy and painful as fuck all of these years. That it's like, oh, there's actually a field that is very small and very niche. And I'm not even going to assume that every single sex therapist is as fucking brilliant as she is, but that she was able to convey with such clarity.
And what good news it is that we can connect sex and spirit and come into this with ease and love and with slow sensuality instead of pressure and stress.
Okay, Bravehearts, you are in for a treat. So buckle your seatbelts, get your journals out, and stay tuned because your mind is about to be blown.
Hi, Bravehearts. Welcome to Permission to be Human. I'm Andrea.
And I'm Janelle.
This is the fourth in our 12-part series to help you talk to your partner about sex and intimacy. This is our second expert interview, and we're so psyched to go even deeper into the deeper layers of how you talk to your partner about sex and intimacy.
And we are so excited to introduce Megan Phippen. She's a somatic sex and relationship therapist. Megan is a clinically trained somatic sex and relationship therapist who guides individuals and couples through the alchemy of transformation, using the fire of their challenges to ignite deeper intimacy and connection. Grounded in a somatic, trauma-informed, queer-affirming, and sex-positive perspective, she creates a safe, non-judgmental, and empowering space for exploration and growth. Her work invites clients to step into the truth of who they are and cultivate relationships rooted in vitality and authenticity. Megan, we're so excited to have you here today. I just like reading how you view clients and relationships and intimacy. It's like already I feel like warm and gooey in my heart.
Yeah, it is so aligned with us.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for the invitation, for having me.
Absolutely. So my first question, since you are our second expert, is for you to define the difference between a sex therapist versus other types of couples therapists. Is there a difference? And why would someone choose one type of therapy over another?
Yeah, so sex therapists specialize. Our niche is in sexuality in all aspects. You can kind of further niche out into that if you want. I specialize in sex and intimacy, so I'm working with individuals and couples. And what differentiates that is therapists are not required to have any training in sexuality whatsoever outside of the states of California and Florida. So even if you're working with couples, there's no requirement at all. And, so so many therapists don't know how to talk to their clients about sex, so they can't help their clients talk about sex with their partners. And so that's what distinguishes me and my work from other therapists, is just having this specialization and centeredness around sex and sexuality.
Beautiful. I always love learning something new, and wild to think about. I would think so many couples go to a therapist to talk about sex and intimacy, and amazing that in 48 states, not required to have any knowledge on those topics.
Yeah, it's pretty disturbing, actually, because sex is not separate from life, and it's not separate from relating and embodiment. So we need, as clinicians, to have these tools to support our clients in having these dialogues, not only in their own self-inquiry, but with the people they're relating to, you know?
I wonder if that is just a generation, a century of like, sex is taboo. We'll put sex over here. We're not going to talk about it. Like that, that's in the same way that, you know, that doctors don't know about women's health very much.
Don't even get me started.
Right? I know, but this is fascinating. I did not know this. So yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, I think it just perpetuates the split and the shame, and keeps things in the shadow and in the taboo. Yeah. And so many of my clients have never spoken to their therapists about sex. And sometimes they'll have their own regular therapist in addition to the work that we're doing and keeping it separate. But it's really woven so deeply into the fabric of who we are. So yeah, that's a paradigm shift that I'm really hoping for in this industry.
So Megan, I'm like vibrating with excitement, like hearing you just name all of this, because obviously as an erotic wellness practitioner myself, who feels that just normalizing the need for the recognition of education and skills in the area of pleasure and intimacy helps us all feel more alive, helps us have more fulfilling relationships. And as much as I know culturally that there's shame in talking about these things, I kind of forget that it's also systematically institutionalized in the education of the people who we're supposed to go to help us.
Yeah. Yes. And I think that's what makes this topic so hard to talk about, right? You know, just as we're embedded in these systems, they're embedded within us. And, you know, we're just swimming in these like relics of Puritanism, and sex is only reserved for procreation or marriage, or it's a function. You know, so much of sex education is around functionality, or, you know, fear-based, you know, narratives around don't get an STI, don't get pregnant, danger, or it's just not discussed in the homes we're growing up in. And without these models, healthy, overt, uncensored models for communication, it's hard to understand our bodies, understand our pleasure, and then be able to articulate like what our desires are, what our boundaries are, and what we want, because it's just laced with this, don't go there.
And so what got you interested in this topic for yourself?
I didn't always expect to become a sex therapist. I knew I wanted to be a therapist and support people in the way that, you know, I was supported, you know, for so many years in therapy. And I studied transpersonal counseling. But what was really lacking from that, my program and just that model in general, was the sexual nature of humanity and the unity between sex and spirit. And I'm just thinking, like, how can we neglect this? So I started doing some qualitative research into kink and BDSM, and was just so inspired by my clients and their stories. And, you know, so many of them mirrored my own in so many ways, and just the healing potential of sex and sexuality, and expanding the definition of that to include all aspects of sensuality and pleasure, I think is one of the most healing paths we can take in these in these fleshy human bodies, what are we here to experience if not like the material, sensual pleasure of what it means to be human?
So beautiful. And what's coming up for me is like within the topic of what we're doing today, which is how to talk to my partner about sex and intimacy, is what I'm hearing is that if you've been able to expand the framework to what you said about like sexuality being a function of being human, but like also a beautiful aspect of being human, a normal aspect, and that there's a connection between sexuality and spirit, then suddenly the edginess of talking about this with the people that we love takes on a different tenor, right? There's it's like invites more courage just by thinking about it differently.
Mm-hmm.
And so more than the logistics, why would you say it's so important to talk to your partner about sex and intimacy?
Yeah, well, we can't get what we want if we don't talk about it. Like
I feel like that's like a mic drop. It's like so true.
yeah, and so it's also like I think about the self-inquiry journey. Like so many of us are, detached from our bodies and our sense of self and pleasure in that way. And so I feel like talking about sex is so much more than just that act of talking. It's like that self-inquiry of knowing yourself, knowing your body, knowing your desires, and how do I embody my authenticity in a way where I can bring it to the relational plane and like enhance intimacy and bring the juice. And I think it's really just about allowing ourselves to be known. And so many of us, like that's so deeply healing because so many of us, actually I think most of us are negotiating throughout our life this tension between authenticity and attachment. If I'm the truth of who I am I still going to be loved? Am I still going to get love and care? Or am I too bratty, too loud, too much? And this stems back to our childhood. But so it's like that authenticity and intimacy thing that we're negotiating. So when we can navigate this skillfully and have compassion for our partners and ourselves, and like you said, Janelle, like the humanity of it all, it becomes just like the permission slip that we need to, yeah, be human, be ourselves,
Amazing. Oh my God. There's so many juicy nuggets in what you just said. Like, but I love this tension between authenticity and attachment.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I don't know what I want, or if a brave heart doesn't know what she wants, how does she figure that out?
Yeah, I think it's this slow journey into what I refer to as like bodyfulness and embodied pleasure. So it's not so much like, mindfulness is this big buzzword, but I believe it was Christine Caldwell who she wrote this book called Bodyfulness, and it changed my life. And it just spoke to this idea of your consciousness, and Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen's work in body mind centering as well, for anyone who's listening and is interested. It's that we have consciousness in all of our cells. And when we get out of our brains, aka the conditioning of how the world taught us how we should be, and into our bodies and learn, sensation is the first language that we speak, before we have cognitive capacities, before we're verbal, we have sensations and we learn to relate to them. But we get some sort of fracturing along the way due to the conditioning and efficiency culture. And we have that mind-body split. So it's like slowly coming back into the body and exploring our relationship with touch and pleasure. And, I'm sipping this tea and it feels good and it tastes good. But the question I ask my clients, and this is where we get into embodied pleasure, is how do you know it feels good? What are the cues that your soma is communicating to you that lets you know you're in pleasure versus just the cognitive, this should feel good, right? Because it's this type of sex or this type of food or whatever. So it's kind of getting in touch with more of like the truth of what your body's needing and wanting versus what you learned about what it means to be a sexual being,
There's so much juiciness in everything you just said,
I
like
can
literally
slow
every
down.
word. No, it's okay. What I would love for you to do though is to go into the example of what you just said of how do you know it feels good. So right now you're sipping your tea. Ha- If you were going to tell a client, what is it that they're paying attention to in their body? Like, can you walk us through what it would be like to like go into the body in that moment to say, oh, what am I paying attention to?
Yeah, well, first, like I'll zoom out as I like to invite clients to feel into the support of where their body is making contact, because that brings us into contact with the like a conscious borders of between self and the world. And so feeling into like where you're supported by the chair or the floor, where's your skin making contact with the clothes or the air, and there's that subtle sensuality in that, and that tends to be an easier avenue for people to begin, especially because I work with a lot of trauma where like just going into the body can be shocking and traumatizing for so many people. So just being able to feel into that is the starting layer. And I invite people to take kind of like a posture of curiosity, which is a widening. So feeling your breath on the inhale, noticing how your back body expands, how your pelvis expands to make contact with the support. And there's a reason for that, not just to get people in touch, but to get out of more of a focus lens. I'm hunting for a sensation. I'm hunting for pleasure. I'm trying to perform for the therapist. I'm trying to get it right.
I want to actually invite all brave hearts to take a deep breath and get into our bodies right now and follow Megan's lead. And just feel yourself sitting, whether it's in your car or in a chair. And imagine feeling the edge of yourself against the air, against the chair, against your clothing. So you find yourself in space and time in this body. And as you take another deep breath and come back to the profundity of Megan, everything that Megan is saying, that what I'm loving about this is she's guiding us. What I'm feeling, Megan, is you're guiding me into how do I talk to my partner about sex and intimacy is first, let me know where my body is. Where am I in this moment? And I'm get my guess, and I'm going to invite this as the next question is like, then once I know what it is that I desire, what it is that I want, and I've learned how to feel it in my body, now it makes it a lot easier to start communicating it, even though there could be still some blocks in the throat chakra. But like, what would you say is the next step once you've kind of grounded in your body and desires?
Yeah. Let me just take
I
a
just want to say,
second.
wait, Bravehearts, are you writing this down? Like, Bravehearts, write this down. Like, I hope you have your journals out, ready. Like, this is good shit. This is how to do it. I'm sorry, Megan. Yes.
Yeah, no. So, yeah, it's sort of like fundamentally, how do we talk to our partners about what we want if we don't know what that fully is? So there's that journey. And then sometimes what comes up is like, we realize there's something that we want and we're afraid of it because it might contrast with like, or conflict with the idea of who we see ourselves as. The most common one that shows up in my work is I'm a feminist. I'm an empowered woman, but I want to be taken. I want to be ravished. I want to be claimed. And is that okay? Am I safe enough to communicate that and to do that? Or, I spend so much time supporting my clients in like, your fantasy is normal and okay, and you're okay. And there's nothing wrong with you for having that. So actually, I almost think that's the next step before communicating to our partners is kind of claiming it for ourselves, because so much of the fear of talking about sex with our partners is if I share what I want, and they don't want it too, I'm going to feel exposed and rejected. And like, what does that mean for our relationship? So rather than throwing people into the wolves of like, just be completely fearless, it's like actually like slowing down and feeling your fear, and kind of the language that I like to use is like, what does this fear or resistance need to soften without force? And so that you can be in relationship with the truth of your desires, um, and be in relationship with fear, not in a way where fear is driving the seat, but you're holding it and taking it with you. So that, because it does happen, sometimes people say, or claim a desire that they have and their partner doesn't. And if they're not embodied and holding their fear and like aligned in the congruency of their worthiness regardless, it's going to be catastrophic of like, oh my God, I'm fundamentally unlovable because my partner doesn't want this, versus I know I'm worthy and safe in my desires regardless. Does that make sense?
It definitely
Okay.
makes sense. And I mean, it's definitely my embodied experience. And like my vision that I have when you're like, oh, bring my fear with me, is me holding a little baby for
Yes.
whatever reason. Like I'm just like cradling a baby in my arm, and I'm like, I got you, right? And I'm just like petting its head, and I'm like, okay, everything's okay. And so I'm curious, how would you invite a brave heart to, like, first of all, I loved the example as someone who's done this themselves, gone from the feminist worldview to feminine of wanting to be taken. How do you help someone support them changing from their own judgment, their own fear of what they should like, versus simply what they like and what they want?
Yeah. Well, we can't transcend what we don't know. So it's really like knowing all of those parts, all of those judgments, all of those criticisms, and working with them individually until we feel like it's like confident enough. It doesn't have like, there's no perfect safety. There's no like flawless confidence, without a personality disorder. So it's really just being like, I'm okay in this. And I think there's like a differentiation process between who we ourselves like actually are at our core, and like who the world told us that we should be. And that's why I call my business Sovereign Self. It's not, and I feel misunderstood in this, because as a relationship therapist, a relationship therapist, it's not about like, oh, you're like on your own and it's like you're all out for yourself and like fuck the relational. It's about being self like authorized, and like noticing, like we need to know our conditioning. And anytime we're not moving from a place of awareness, which is really, I'll go back to your question of how, because I think I'm talking around it, slowing down, being in the body, feeling yourself. Where do you begin? Where do you end? Where does the world begin? And so that's why I love to work with like just skin and touch and things like that, because it's like that, it's the like external nervous system in a way of how we're interfacing with the world. And it's hard to like, I'm noticing as I talk about it, it's like hard to describe linearly because it's such an embodied process. So if I'm working with a client, and they're talking about, oh, well, like I can't want this because, for example, I'm tracking what's happening in their body. Maybe there's a caving in the thoracic cavity. And, like I'll ask them what's happening in their body, and they might be able to describe a sensation. But if they can't, I actually invite them to go into or amplify, I call it a shadow movement. So as we're talking about, all aspects of our self, we're moving in ways. And that's the beauty of somatic therapy and the mirroring process. Is like, oh, there's a story that your body's trying to tell. So I might invite a client to, oh, I noticed this caving in the thoracic cavity. I want you to amplify and follow that movement impulse. Spend some time there. What do you notice? Does that feel familiar? Oh, this reminds me of the time that I was caught masturbating at 6 years old, and I was told that um, good girls don't do that, and those are private. And I developed this story of shame around like my desires, and I have this like literal womb brain split because of it. And so that often the stories will come up just from going into the body. Like it doesn't have to be this whole I'm this way because, it's just like let's explore this range of what's wanting to come through your body and letting it speak.
Because I've also experienced being like, oh, no, I'm supposed to be this way. I am this way in life, but I want this in bed, right? And
Yeah.
so when we go through that experience, you're saying, look, it's okay. I guess my question is that I want to explain to Bravehearts, maybe you can do the best job of explaining it, that it feels like it's okay to have two opposing feelings or thoughts because we are complex humans. But yet still, it feels a little bit off to me. Like, how can I want that when I want this? I was literally just explaining this to my teenager. Like, oh, I actually am a feminist and I like it when someone holds the door for me. I'm like, no, that totally exists. I want to be ravaged. I want to be dominated. I want someone to decide for me. I want someone to take care of me. And I feel very powerful as a woman. And these things live together.
Yeah.
So how do you get there? How do you be okay with both?
I think, I mean, simply put, like drop the over identification with the labels about what it means to be this or what it means to be that. Because if I'm so attached to my identity as a feminist, I'm not creating, I mean, and that can be a part of it, right? But then we're also taking the relics of what society has made that become, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
this even shows up in like queerness for myself and so many of my clients, as if we're like hyper fixated on this label. Like, do we really get to be the breadth and the truth of who we are, which is like so multidimensional? Like, why can't we be feminists and want to be like fucked and taken and have the door open for us and be provided for? Like, who said? And so it's a fun, I think of like this whole journey of embodiment and embodied sexuality is this like fun permission slip to follow our pleasure and like what wants to come through us. Sometimes we do have to like negotiate between the stories if they feel like there's this like big tension, but you know, I think it's we get to be who we are without the labels that, you know, of course we want to belong in community, but we don't want to confine ourselves, and we don't want the rigidity of that just to make other people comfortable or us to be like palatable and understood. What matters is like we understand ourselves. And when we embody that authenticity in our relationships and bring that forward without shame, like, yeah, we might lose the people that aren't for us, but we find our community and we find the intimacy that's so gratifying and fulfilling. So I hope that answered your question, and maybe I went on a little more and just followed the momentum of whatever wanted to come through the channel.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Thank you for addressing that.
What I'm hearing with Andrea's question and you're answering is the paradox of being human, that all these things exist simultaneously, and that it's actually what you just said, Megan, about not over identifying, that it's okay to be the householder and the the breadwinner or the manager or in charge of all of these things, and it's okay to also want something different in the bedroom. Like these two things, like one doesn't define the other. And in fact, a question for you, Megan, is that what I'm hearing is that if we find our authenticity and allow it in our sexuality and in the bedroom, then that probably then impacts the rest of our life so that we feel more alive, more full, and more seen.
Yes. Yes. I think it's understanding that and giving permission to the fact that we are paradoxes too. I love that you brought that in. one of my favorite things that Carl Jung taught is the tension between the opposites produces the third thing. So if we're feeling torn, we can sit in the tension, and like the third thing is not a thing at all. It's a present moment embodied experience, like moment to moment embodied experience and expression of who we are. So when we're trying to even when we're trying to figure out, I need to know exactly what I want so I can communicate it to my partner and have it wrapped up in a bow, not even necessarily. We just have to be in touch with our bodies enough to know, I want to feel this way. And then it becomes this co-created effort with lots of curiosity of how do we get there together. It's this exploration of shared pleasure versus, a problem to be solved of we got to talk about this, or this isn't enough. It's just what wants to come through our bodies. And where do we interface?
I love that. Love it.
Megan, I'm so excited. You're literally using the words that I use with my clients, where I say, "Oh, okay, this is going to be a co-creation of the truth that's between us." Mm-hmm. And one thing that I want to call out that I'm also just seeing between the three of us here and what we each offer, and the journey of embodying our sexuality is Andrea, who's a Braveheart coach, works with people online to help them just even identify what it is in the transition of their lives. What is the fear that they've been kind of holding on to, and giving them permission to allow, just to want it and to allow for it. And then Megan, what I hear you doing is especially in this realm of sexuality is, you're bringing such embodied wisdom and knowledge and profundity of, okay, here's the why, here's the how, and here's all the tools to help you navigate through, now that you've identified what it is, some of the desires, what you want. And then me as the embodied practitioner, right? Oh, and now you can practice with Janelle, here's what it's like to actually live in your body, to feel in your body what it is. So I'm just seeing that thread of that, and it's kind of mirroring the journey. The three of us are mirroring the journey that you're speaking to, Megan, of how we get to knowing what it is that we want and then getting to embody it.
Yeah. Which leads us back to how do you talk to your partner about what you want?
Yeah.
Right.
The next step. So then once we've kind of integrated all these pieces and we feel safe enough to broach this and have this conversation, I think first, slowing down, because so many times when people want to broach sex with their partner, it's because something's unsatisfying. There's the moment to moment, or I should say in the moment, oh yeah, that feels good, or I'm going to move your hand here, or I'm going to communicate through a moan. And then there's the, whoa, we need to have a bigger conversation about our sex life. And usually by the time couples see me, there's a huge split. But what I will say is, recognizing first and foremost, why do you want to talk about sex? What are the goals? Not so much because I'm frustrated or I'm unsatisfied or I want it this way and I never get this, but what's the ideal outcome? And typically for people, it's connection and pleasure. So I like to invite people to let that be your guiding light. Remember, you want connection and pleasure with your partner. You don't want to berate them or, tear them down. You're on the same team and you likely have the same goal if it's connection and pleasure, right? And so if we lead with our frustrations, it's usually not going to go well just because of the shame around sex and what that means for so many people. So if I show up to my partner and I'm just you never make me come, how do you think they're going to feel? I think if we're having bigger conversations, creating as much structure as possible around them is helpful, so that we can make sure that we are prioritizing moving at the pace of the intimacy and the relationship rather than the outcome of, what we're like so gung-ho about. So it's like leading with what we want as the outcome, but it's pacing and slowing down and being with, okay, are we regulated enough? Maybe I say, I want to talk about our sex life. Is this a good time? And oh my God, like now I'm anxious already. Okay, noticing that tightness in your chest. Now we co-regulate. We're talking and communicating at the pace of our intimacy and our connection, and prioritizing that above all else versus getting our needs met over the other at the expense of the other person.
Yeah.
And dumping our charge onto them. Like so much when we like, okay, finally, like they're ready to listen to me about all of the things I've been wanting to say about sex. So I create this list of every way I'm unsatisfied. And it's like, oh my gosh, no. Leading with the, I love it when, I crave when, I'm longing for this, I miss this, is a completely different energy than like, you never fuck me like that, or whatever. Like we never do it this way, or I don't know, whatever the complaint could be.
Yeah, those are really good concrete tips too, and concrete like ways to phrase. Like that's awesome.
I'm loving this context of, in a conversation, we're leading with connection and intimacy, connection and pleasure, right? Like I think Braveheart's like, let's just I'll just take that on, right? That we're saying that in any conversation with our partners, we're actually seeking connection and pleasure, and that is what we want to, as you said, Megan, lead with that. And what I want to dig into a little bit more is in the how of that. So if we think like the conversation, we're going to, maybe we've blocked out a time, we have a half an hour, maybe an hour to talk. And then at the end of that, we have an expectation or a destination. And what I'm hearing with you is, no, you may end up co-regulating is the phrase that you use. And I'd love for you to like explain that, like, which it could be like sitting back to back or doing belly to belly for an hour. And you might not talk about anything, but you're just seeking connection and pleasure with each other.
Yeah, because I find that when I'm working with people who are in long-term relationships and this topic comes up for the first time, the other person's like, oh my God. I mean, I've seen this happen in real time, like this utter shock and fear and shame of how long have you been feeling this way? And am I just like a disappointment? And so again, rather than just giving the other person the floor while their partner's suffering and festering in shame, slowing down, again, prioritizing the intimacy and the connection. And that's, I think, what so many of us want out of our sex lives. So this is part of expanding the definition of sex to just include intimacy around these things, and talking about sex, when there's enough resource and not dysregulation, can be pretty hot too. Ooh, your values, your desires, your needs, your juice, what gets you off. And so if we can stay in our own posture of, there's so much embodiment to having these conversations effectively, where if I can stay, one of the cues that I'll share with Bravehearts is like, ground in your back body, take some breaths, feel your back against a chair. As you breathe, bring your consciousness back so that you have some anchoring in yourself. And if you're watching the video, like there's like something that's solid and secure, and I can still move forward and reach out and make contact with you, put my hand on your leg and staying in my back body, versus if I'm here or if I'm way back here, there's some like level of like front and back balance to that. And I might be going on a tangent here, but really what this is like, can I maintain myself enough, be in my back body enough so my heart can be open to you and your desires, and I'm not taking it personally? Because one thing that happens so much in these conversations is, if someone's bringing a desire, their partner just collapses in shame, and it perpetuates this cycle of, I'm too much, my needs are too much, and my partner can't hold space for them, or I'm not enough for my partner. And so it's really like coming into just I'll say it again, it's really like the co-regulation And what is required for a lot of this is attunement to the other person of like, oh, let's just take a breath here, and maybe a word of affirmation. Like, my intention is not to shame you. Like, I really want to connect with you. Like, we're reiterating, we're validating, we're affirming. But part of what this makes this so effective is it reminds and it's an active expression of secure attachment of, hey, we're on the same team here. This isn't me versus you. This is, I'm here for you and I'm here for us, and I want this for us. And that tends to support any of the abandonment trauma of, okay, if I don't do this for you, you're going to leave me. It's sort of like, okay, we're here regardless. And even if, we get to that can be something that we do together in a way that's going to honor our love and intimacy, not, I think of like, yeah, not at the expense of the relationship itself.
I love that you brought in there like the secure attachment to be able to handle like this, like whatever is being said. So the next question is, I'm guessing like not every conversation results in this is my, even if you're co-regulated and you're securely attached and you love each other, that you're going to have the same desire. So what do you suggest when couples do have a mismatch in desire?
Yeah, it depends, because that's a whole process. First I'll just name like a mismatch in desire is like pretty guaranteed if we're with someone long enough, just in that we're never going to be perfectly attuned to, okay, my partner wants sex and I want it 100% of the time that they do. Like it's just not realistic. So there's some that's like, okay, it's not distressing to the relationship. And then there's some that's typically when they show up and work with me where it's like, I don't want to have sex with you, maybe even at all. And I do. And so how do we work with that? And usually they're there with me because they want to close the gap. Some people just are like, no, there has to be a willingness to even participate in that process of, I want us to find intimacy on our terms and our way, even if it doesn't involve sex. But yeah, how I support clients when they're really wanting to work on these things is, we're working with stress reduction, not just because our sexuality, our sex hormones cannot be produced at the same time as our stress hormones. So first and foremost, to support someone in maybe even contacting desire if they want.
Interesting.
I've worked with people that are like, if I never had sex again, I could care less. And great, then it's not a problem for me. But if you lack desire and you want it, we're going to work with stress, the external factors that you can control, and also just your own capacity to regulate. A lot of times we're working with like practicing kindness towards our bodies, especially if they're changing as we age, and our partner's bodies, as we spend more and more years together and they're changing, and, we're not as familiar with their body as it goes through a new life stage, whether it's perimenopause, menopause, or just changes in like erectile tissue for all sexes, And so a lot of it involves like the compassion around that, and the permission to just be a human that changes. Because sometimes people are like, okay, well, I'm this way and I have a belly roll and no one wants me anymore. Or, I can't get an erection like I used to, or I don't have as much vaginal wetness or whatever. And we start to like judge ourselves and shut that down. So I really want to bring that into the conversation because it's so important. And I work with so many people on that. And not to like breeze through, but I think like the last and like most crucial thing is like really expanding the definition of sex. First, one of the things I do actually when it's that drastic of yes and no is taking sex off the table. And usually people get so surprised by that. They're like, Megan, that is the last thing I want. Usually the person with more desires, kidding me? But you watch the other person soften, and that's what we want ultimately. And it's not even about them cultivating this like ravenous desire. it's about them feeling safe to open. And so much of what happens when there's such a big split is intimacy dries out altogether. Is I'm afraid that if I hold your hand or we snuggle or we shower together, it's going to lead to the sex that I don't want to have.
Yeah.
And so sometimes taking sex off the table, however the clients define it, I totally let them define it. And sometimes it's like just, the sex that they describe. I always ask, like, tell me about the sex you don't want to have. And when they say it out loud, I'm like, well, yeah, that makes sense to me. Based on what they're saying around, they're not feeling pleasure out of it. So taking that off the table creates an opportunity for couples, again, to co-create, to cultivate curiosity, to expand their repertoire of intimacy and relating that doesn't involve like exclusively penetration, really is like what that comes down to. And I cannot tell you how many clients are like flabbergasted when I'm like, sex doesn't have to equal penetration. That's just what we've been conditioned to believe and taught to believe. It can be anything you want it to be and anything that feels good. And when we remove the pressure or the performance, we create more spaciousness and a softening and an opening for like what wants to come through us, and we can lean into it and build trust with the other person, and it can blossom into something that's uniquely theirs. And there are times where it's still not enough, and then that leads to bigger conversations typically. I don't make any suggestions, but I'm like, okay, what do we do here? Sometimes it's okay, we're going to open the relationship, or sometimes it's we're going to terminate the relationship. And at least it's from this place of, like this embodied understanding, and we've gone through the process of relating intimately with each other in an authentic way versus like this pressure of not getting what we want.
I am kind of like awestruck, dumbstruck, just at like everything you're sharing, Megan. I just feel, I actually feel so affirmed in Andrea's my decision to like bring in experts to talk about this, because you're mirroring my experience quite literally in that last example. But bringing in so much just like wisdom and acceptance and tools to how to navigate this. And I feel profound gratitude for you and what you're doing in the world and how you're showing up. And it just makes me feel better to know that you're out there.
Janelle and I really have been talking about this very thing in some of the same words, some of different words, for the last year or two. Like, but we're all basing it on our own experience and our stories and like our anecdotes and our learning and but we're not trained therapists, right? And we're just like putting it out there and saying, okay, well, this is how we figured it out, and it's really messy, and you're like, yes, this is actually the way. But there's a way to get to it more clearly, more confidently, probably faster. And I'm glad. There is a little bit of sadness for me in that, I wish I would have known this a long time ago. And so, yeah, it's beautiful. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and the permission to show up. And what I would have said was like under-resourced, but it's sort of like this perfectly mirrors like what we've been talking about is like, I don't need to control like how you guys and your audience wants to see me, or even like be in a performance mode. Like I can show up like raw and vulnerable and real, and it's like it lands, and that's such medicine too. And yeah, I also wish I had this earlier than I did, but it's like all part of the sacred journey that I think makes the three of us as sexuality professionals like so effective, because it's what did I not have and what did I need? What's missing from the field?
Yes.
Like even somatic therapy, to my earlier point, like doesn't involve sexuality. And so much of sex therapy is still highly medicalized. And it's like,
Right.
where's the spirit? Where's the human? Where's the embodiment of it all?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Totally.
Beautiful. So, Megan, if someone wanted to work with you or reach out to you, how can they do that?
Yeah, so my website is sovereignself.love. My Instagram is at sovereignself.love. I don't really post so much, but my email is as well as Megan at sovereignself.love. So feel free to reach out. I'm not taking on new clients, typically a few months of a waiting list. Like, again, this work is so needed, like so needed. So if you're interested, get in touch sooner rather than later. And I'm always down for the conversations. Like, it's fun to be here and talk about these things.
Thank you, Megan.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with a brave heart. So even if you can't see her in person, like there is like download this episode, save it, rate it, love it, and then just replay it again.
Send it to your partner.
And again and again.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Thank you, Braveheart. Thanks for listening. We love you.
Hey, Bravehearts, looking for permission? Work with us. We offer Braveheart coaching. Follow us on Instagram. Meet us in real life at a Braveheart conversation. Subscribe to our newsletter. Do all this and more at our website, permissiontobehuman.live.